building smart cities. This panel focuses on addressing the policy dimensions related to how cities utilize digital transformation and other challenges toward building sustainable and resilient urban settlements. Smart cities are becoming centers of innovation, as highlighted by Victor and other panelists earlier, and accelerated development as well. And the majority of the population of the world soon will be living in cities. Take Dubai, for example, one of the most advanced, one of the fastest growing cities in the world, actually, according to many indicators. But it's also an example of one of the most advanced globally in smart cities development in terms of infrastructure, regulation, partnerships. Globally, a wide range of smart cities technologies are also enabling massive savings, new growth opportunities, new forms of citizen engagement or citizen government interactions, and better environmentally friendly measures in development and growth and planning. However, at the same time, they may have been creating new forms of exclusion, new emerging policy challenges to be addressed. This panel addressed this dilemma, and I hope we will be able to do this in the next hour or so that we have. And to do so, I'm very pleased to have representing Smart Dubai, Ms. Mira Al-Sheikh, representing Smart Dubai instead of Her Excellency Dr. Aisha bin Bashir, who unfortunately had a medical issue to deal with. We hope that she will be feeling much better later today. And also Ivano Lanelli, he's the CEO of Dubai Carbon Center of Excellence. Mr. Saeed Labbar, Managing Director, Chairman of the Board at Emirates Green Building, and the Council Managing Director at AESG. And last, but definitely not least, Dr. Victor Pineda, who you just heard of. He's the Director of Inclusive Cities Lab at the University of California, Berkeley. He's the President of Word Enabled, and who has massive experience in embedding inclusivity in smart cities development as an urban planner here in the UAE and globally as well. So to start, I would like to direct my first question to Mira. Mira, Her Excellency Dr. Aisha, in addition to her role as the Director General of Smart Dubai, she's also a chairwoman of SDG 11 working group. And as a reminder, this panel will focus on SDG 9 and SDG 11 specifically. And to remind us all, SDG 9 focuses on building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. While SDG 11 is focused specifically on cities, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. These are major undertakings on a global scale, given that the majority of the population of the world live in cities. So Mira, tell us a little bit about first SDG 11 Global Council. On a global level, what is being done to address SDG 11?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum. I think we cannot begin without addressing and commending Her Excellency Reem Al-Hashimi, Minister of State for International Cooperation, on the amazing work she has done to promote the acceleration of the SDGs implementation by creating and chairing the SDGs Global Councils in general. Her Excellency Dr. Aisha bin Bashir, Director General of Smart Dubai, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today, chairs the SDG 11 Global Council, which, as you pointed out, addresses sustainable cities and communities. The SDG 11 Global Council was established as a global council comprising of members from international organizations, international bodies, NGOs, and academia. It is a truly global council made up of members not only from the UAE, but from around the world as well. These stakeholders have been working together for the entirety of 2018 to come up with, to accomplish the first phase of implementation of this council's objectives. I'll take you through briefly through the objectives of the council. So the council on its first year is in charge of creating a framework to implement the council, where this framework will be implemented inshallah in the second year of its tenure. In the first year, we have created an application framework, where this application framework is very unique in the sense that it is generic and designed on purpose to be adaptable to any city around the world, regardless of its size, its level of development, and where it currently stands in terms of implementation of the SDGs. This framework was built using a very pragmatic and practical approach, and where it identified different principles and challenges. These principles, in a high level, leverage on existing initiatives in each city and does not reinvent the wheel. One of the principles is also to formulate strong partnerships between the public and the private sector and academia from around the world. It does recognize differences between cities, that no two cities in the world are the same. And it, of course, focuses on being inclusive and leaving no one behind. When it comes to the challenges, we do understand that there are a lot of initiatives around the world which work on accelerating the implementation of SDGs. So cities may be confused as to which initiative to adopt or which would further benefit these cities. So that is a very big challenge upon itself. There are also different development levels around the cities where not every city may be able to address the implementation of the SDGs. Also, one of the biggest hindrances here is financing. Will we be able to find financial solutions to help in accelerating the implementation of SDGs? Because as you know, financing may be a showstopper. If there was no proper finance, how will we be able to accelerate? So when it comes to applying the framework, we focused on 4 very simple application areas or steps. First thing, we wanted to baseline the cities, to know what cities to prioritize and which cities to begin with. Then we innovate to identify quick wins. Cities may have access to certain areas where they could very quickly implement the SDGs, but they were not focusing on them before. Then we implement and assess, and the cycle goes on and on again. So when it comes to baselining, basically we look at different enablers that are available in different cities around the world. When it comes to leadership and governance, does these cities have policies, frameworks, legislation that is already existing but they are not leveraging on? Is there a lot of private sector presence in these cities around the world? And can we leverage on the presence of these private companies or NGOs to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs? How can we use science, technology, and innovation, fourth industrial revolution technologies, emerging technologies, to accelerate the implementation in certain cities? The availability of data and how we can use data to feed these initiatives and technologies. And as I mentioned before, financing as well. So this is the first step. I'm going to go through them very quickly. This was the first phase of the implementation for the first year. We are now reconvening at the World Government Summit in next month, inshallah, where all the members of the council will be present to discuss and finalize this application framework and prioritize and decide on which cities should we pilot our implementation on, inshallah.
Excellent. Well, this is a global effort that is definitely needed, and Dubai's leadership in that specific SDG is well-deserved given the progress that has been done. So thanks for the update on this, and this is definitely food for thought. I'll move to Ivano and focus a little bit on, given what has been said, given what Victor has said already, but what Mira has said, what we've heard in the morning as well from the other panel. Clearly, there's a huge population growth that is governments are not able sometimes to deal with, which requires a lot of new planning models, a lot of new consumption models taking place, and energy demand is critical for all of these population growth dilemmas, if you like. Now, how do we manage to reconcile all of this? We have a paradox of sorts. We have a population growing globally, consumption growing, SDGs requiring us to reduce our carbon footprint, but certainly there's a fix. What's your thoughts?
Well, we have to take the example of the UAE specifically and give credit when credit is due. The SDGs are merely a long-term strategy meant to aggregate society towards a common goal. And everyone who's been in the area for the last few years has seen how the UAE has leveraged these long-term strategies such as Vision 2021, Vision 2030. We have a Vision 2071 strategy. Again, I'm Italian. For me, the concept of long-term and government do not coexist. So obviously, I cherish this approach. And again, what has happened is the UAE, Dubai specifically, has given me a lot more leverage to apply change, whereas both the United Nations and the Italian government, it's not that they didn't give me support, they just did not have all their proverbial ducks in a row. And this is because change is happening, change is necessary. When we look at the SDGs, we cannot take one without the other. We have population growth, but what happens when we bring soon to be 8 billion people out of poverty? The energy demand is not just going to double, it's going to be 9 times the current energy demand. And if we bring these 8 billion people into middle class standards, we need 16 times the energy demand that we have now. So even renewables, our efforts towards having a greener energy mix will not be sufficient if we do not understand the preciousness of the resources. So obviously, cities like Dubai have been instrumental in creating replicable and scalable model. And again, if we look at the SDG, if we look at sustainability, these 2 keywords have been at the forefront of every policy: replicable and scalable. Our ability to benchmark economically viable innovation has been instrumental in the region. We've seen a lot of innovation for the region come out of, let's call it this patch of sand. And this patch of sand has been a true engine of innovation because it has leveraged the ability for a multicultural interaction to generate these ideas, to bring the South-South, the East and West together into a proverbial new age of enlightenment, so to say, bringing these large-scale implemented activities within the city limits. So we see innovation in transportation, in energy. Hopefully we will see also new waste management activities coming out. And all we need to do at this point in time is just showcase it. Be open about both the data and the actual impact so that we can quantify and replicate the models.
Well, thank you very much. It's definitely something that will keep, or already keeping, policymakers up all night. I'll move to Saeed, and I'll give the last word on this round to Victor. Saeed, you also work with the World Green Building Council, one of your hats. And on a global level, this is building and cities and planning is a major part of the SDG. It's a major contributor to the increased heating of the planet, the carbon footprint, as well as affecting lives of millions of people. So on a global level, what has been done to address these issues?
Okay, thank you, Fadi. I think to start with, maybe to give some context, I mean, the 15 years or so that I've been involved in this space around sustainable city planning development, I wear a number of hats, one of them as an engineering practitioner working on actual cities and buildings development. To think about the journey that we've gone through, and this is not sort of something that's new that's just come about in the last 2 or 3 years because of the SDGs. I mean, if you look back to the 1980s, there was the new urbanism movement, which was basically stemmed out of the US, out of the fact that it was causing a big economic issue and health issues, that traffic jams, people spending time in cars was very ineffective. So there was this movement towards creating density, creating walkable communities, places where people could work and live in proximity. And then this has sort of evolved in the 90s into sustainable urbanism, where it was talking about the well-being of people and places. And that really was what triggered the start of, you know, concepts around sustainable development, around green buildings. And I think we've seen this evolution over that time. And really the focus throughout that period was, how can we do development while creating less damage to the environment? And the paradigm that we're reaching now is actually what we've been doing for that period is not enough. You know, just developing by doing less damage is not enough. We need to be at a point where we're developing but reversing that, because we've created so much damage. If you think about the figures that Ivana was talking about, you know, 8 billion people coming out of poverty, going into cities, the effect this is going to have on our energy systems and on our environment is unprecedented. We've never faced anything like this before, and we're already at a tipping point before that even happens. So I guess in terms of the global movement, which I'm part of, I think one of the big triggers was the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, where I think that the two striking things I saw from the Paris Agreement when I was there was one, the realization and willingness of everyone that we have to do something now. We need to put aside any bipartisan disagreements and the like. We have to do something because this is urgent. And two was that this is not necessarily going to be led by federal government. The role of cities and mayors at that conference was way more than it was in previous years that I had attended. And once that's triggered, and I think what we took it as the global green building movement was, we said, well, we have to translate this agreement into, you know, which all the countries, bar a few, have signed up to. What does that mean to us as a building sector? And what we did, and this is just the literal translation of the agreement, was that by 2030, every new building that we build has to be operating at net zero carbon. So between now and 12 years, anything new we build has to be at net zero carbon. And by 2050, we have to retrofit or implement action in all our cities that all our buildings are at net zero carbon. So you think about the challenge that has in such a short time frame. I mean, if you take the first one I talked about, to go from designing a building, constructing it, till it being ready, that can be a 6-year process. So for us to have policy in place today, so that in 12 years those buildings are at net zero, we have basically 6 years to get policy in place to reach that goal. Now, we sort of put this as a call to action, really starting from industry, and I think the earlier panel we're talking a lot around the role of industry, the role of the private sector and public sector. I mean, I strongly believe that innovation is going to be led by the private sector. The role of the government is to shape the trajectory that we need to go to and allow the private sector to innovate there. So we put out this call to action, and initially 3 companies stepped forward and said, yep, we'll sign up to that. We don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we believe in the ingenuity of our teams, of human ingenuity. Engineers will be able to find a solution to these goals. And one of those companies actually from this region, from Dubai, Marj Al Futtaim Properties, one of the 3 globally that signed up to this, which we were very pleased and proud of as well. But what happened is a snowball effect, that once that started, a number of other companies said, well, if they've said that they're going to do it, we may not know the answers yet, but we'll do it as well. And then when we had the Climate Action Summit in September, then the really amazing thing happened, is that 22 cities stepped forward and says, well, if these companies say they can do it, and they're confident it can be done, we can as well. And these are not small cities. London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Stockholm, to name a few. They all signed up and says, we're going to do this. So in terms of where we are as a global movement, this is really the trajectory, that we have to be reaching a point of transitioning from doing less damage and rewarding ourselves for doing less damage. We need to be reaching that net zero, net positive trajectory on cities. And I think it's not to underscore the challenge that this is. This is the greatest challenge we're going to have. You know, there's the challenges of climate change and everything else, but for us to reprogram our cities to achieve this is really a big challenge.
Well, thank you, Saeed. Back to you, Victor. So, Victor, you wrote a very inspirational and well-written paper that is available for you to download from the. You can find the QR codes, snap your phones, take these papers, and download them. But the paper you wrote was on cities for all and how to ensure inclusivity into cities. And one of the areas that you've communicated in this paper with your authors or co-authors is that it's not about just social inclusion, it's also economics. It's a lot of factors play in that. So in addition to technology and emissions and carbon and buildings, people, how do we ensure in smart cities while we're moving forward this social inclusion that feeds into economic development? On a global level, what are the practices that you're seeing that we need to be addressing here?
Thank you, Fadi. I think the transformation of a city requires us to understand that a city is a system of systems, meaning that it's not just one approach within one sector, but rather how to create a seamless set of systems that have a way to interconnect and where people don't fall through the cracks. So if we think about the experience that we have in a city, we feel happy when the city responds to our needs, to our preferences, to our lifestyles. And so we shouldn't be thinking about inclusion just for some small group of people, but rather about inclusion as a way to innovate the governance and the functions of these cities. Now, what is the business case? Well, the business case is that you absorb the production capacity of large segments of the population that are excluded. You create the inclusive infrastructure that create a seamless, frictionless on-ramp for innovation and for growing the production possibility frontier. So, for example, persons with disabilities and their families have $8 trillion of disposable income. So on the side of being a smart city that wants to attract tourism, in light of the World Expo, building the inclusive infrastructure means that you have a market segment that travels a regular trip, you stay longer, you bring more family members, and you spend more money per day. It's a very lucrative niche market for the city of Dubai. On another side, in terms of some recent studies by Microsoft on the technology side, and dealing with smart cities, companies that have incorporated universal design in the development of the products and services are 23% more profitable and have a larger and a better positioning in terms of their net revenue. So I think that you see that forward-looking companies that are understanding that the inclusion dimension is about innovation, but it's also about the bottom line. It's not just about doing something that feels good, but actually understanding that with 1 billion people in the world that live with a disability, for example, 1 out of every 5, 6, 7 people in cities experience some type of exclusion. It's not about having these people look like me. It's about understanding that people might have, like we talked about earlier, might have diabetes, might have a learning disability, might have difficulty with hearing. It's about the spectrum of human conditions. To build that into a smart city will truly make it smart.
That's great. Back to Dubai. Now we talked a little bit about the global scale. Mira, technology has been embedded in the vision of Dubai as one of the drivers or accelerators of development in general, and Smart Dubai office has been leading many of these initiatives, or most of them, if not all, towards building or embedding these technologies into innovation and development. Now, how can we scale up, given what Dubai has been doing and what it has plans for in the future? How can we scale up these smart cities efforts to ensure that all of the items identified in the SDG 11 are identified, whether it's the inclusion, the safety, the resilience, and the sustainability?
Well, Fadi, I'm proud to say that due to the futuristic vision of our leadership here in Dubai, Dubai has already achieved the majority of the SDG 11's goals and targets. Let me give you some examples. When it comes to housing, there's no population in Dubai that lives in slums, that all lands are registered title deeds in the government. And when it comes to access to basic services, Dubai has achieved 100% potable water and authorized electricity service, as well as sustainable access to improved water source. 100% of the population has access to sanitization facilities. Similarly, when it comes to healthcare, the population has access to healthcare facilities, and Dubai is recognized to be one of the safest cities around the world. As well as when it comes to access to transport, due to the high income and the high GDP per capita, there's a very high status of vehicle ownership here in Dubai, as well as multimodal modes of transport, where it be land, air, or sea, as well as bicycle networks that are now being created around the city. Inclusive and sustainable urbanization and environmental resilience rates are also very high here in Dubai. When it comes to Smart Dubai and its efforts, Smart Dubai leverages on fourth industrial revolution technologies such as blockchain, AI, Internet of Things, and big data to achieve the local goals that are set here in Dubai by the leadership. The Smart Dubai technology transformation agenda derives from the national agenda of the UAE, the Dubai Plan 2021, and the SDGs as well. In Smart Dubai, we play the role of the smart planning and governance arm for the cities, where we work on smart policies to ensure that the smart transformation agenda is articulated through the entire city. We are seamless experiences and technology efficiency drivers also in the city by working on different strategies such as the Dubai blockchain strategy, the Dubai AI strategy, and most recently we were mandated by His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Crown Prince of Dubai, to create a paperless government where all government internal and external transactions are to be completely paperless by 12/12/2021. This means that by that date we will be cutting on 1 billion papers that are used by the government, which equates to 140,000 trees, which is 4 times the size of Central Park in New York. So this is one of the efforts we're working on in terms of
Well, that's great. Before I move on to the rest panelists, I need to just you touched on smart policies that you highlighted in the Dubai, and this is a policy forum or trying to discuss the policies. So in developing these initiatives and these goals, I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges in changing some policies, putting in place new policies. So especially whether it's the digital transformation that we're affecting these existing norms and infrastructures, or thinking about issues such as inclusion and other new pressing issues by the SDGs. So how did you manage to do that? What are the lessons that you can extract from Dubai's experience to the region and the UAE?
So when creating a policy or when we want to implement a policy, we usually work and touch upon 3 main pillars: technology, culture, and legislation. So the technology part is the easy part. You can build it in-house, you can work with a consultation company, technology is the easy part. Technology is available and widely spread, and there are a lot of outlets that can provide that service. The 2 other barriers to creating and implementing a policy is usually the legislative policy, which is the legislation that is in the city and how to tackle the legislative barriers, and the cultural barrier. So it is easy for you to create technology, implement technology, but the usage of technology, the inclusivity of, and the spreading of this technology and the adoption rate is where you need to, where you actually create the success out of this technology. If the technology is there, it's not being used, then you're not successful. So by addressing these 3 pillars, each giving it its importance and each giving it its roadmap and its implementation plan, we tackled it.
You managed to get it. Great, thank you. Ivano, now looking at coming back to Dubai and the UAE as well, if you look at global indicators and you think about carbon emissions, you will find that many of the Gulf countries, including the UAE, are listed as having some of the highest carbon footprint globally, given many factors, developmental issues, the nature of the industry, the nature of the economy, and others. So first, how would the UAE be able to, your thoughts first on this, and then how would the UAE be able to achieve this monumental challenge of reducing this carbon footprint?
I need to correct you there.
Great.
It's how the UAE has achieved, because it has already done a lot more than people know. Let me start by saying that when we talk about meeting the SDGs as an example, we have not only met them, but we are already exceeding them. Just, I would say, a few weeks back, we launched a 50-year charter with several articles. It took days for Dubai to look at how to implement the different articles within the charter, which is unheard of in government. And again, for me, it was Article 7, looking at self-sustainable homes. And within the very short space of, I think, 10 days, we were given 5,200 villas to conceptualize upon. The project has already been launched under a tender by Etihad ESCO, just within one of the areas, but nevertheless, we're talking about days to implement. Now, Dubai, the UAE have always been looked upon as the big bad wolves of carbon emission. That is inaccurate. That might have been the case back in year 2000, when the actual carbon emission per capita were in the range of 40. Now, that is still the case for some of the other GCC countries. But in the last inventory that was conducted, and again, we're just starting now the inventory for 2018, but in 2017, Dubai had reached a per capita emission of 17 tons per capita. When compared to the 40 of a decade ago, that is substantial improvement. And this is done by leveraging a strong investment strategy in state-of-the-art, in challenging business, conventional business practices. Now, this is done through a myriad of government policies, including business awards, excellence awards. Entities within the government actually compete against each other to do it better, to do it more visibly. And this is a remarkable achievement. When we look at the UAE as a whole, the emissions have decreased from 40 to slightly above 18. So we have a really good average, considering all the oil that gets exported, considering all the metal that gets produced and used by others. Now, these numbers may not mean much, but if we compare it to the CO2 per capita emissions of the US, which stand at 17, you can see how numbers are a lot more equivalent. But then again, the UAE, altogether, we're only producing about 150 million tons per year of CO2 emissions, whereas countries like the US, China, are in the range of 8–9 billions a year. So our efforts are commensurate to the style of living, to the approach that has been taken, and it's highly replicable. Whereas when we look at the greater scheme of things, our efforts are marginal when compared to literally the big bad wolves out there, which do not take such a proactive stand in the climate change negotiations.
Great. Saeed, on the same area, on the same point, green buildings play an important role in ensuring that this progress continues. I know that there are existing players in the market, there are existing norms, there are existing traditions, there are existing economies that push towards or pull back towards older or bad ways of doing things. How, in terms of policies, can we incentivize change, drive these new building measures, new developmental measures, urban planning measures, whether it's in the UAE level or even in the region, if we are to learn from a UAE experience, to ensure that this progress continues in that area?
Okay, I think there's maybe two aspects to this. One, I think we've achieved a lot up to this point, and I think the policies, the strategies we have in place for today are exceptional. We've achieved a lot, as Ivano has talked about, but we still have a huge amount to do to reach the goals that we need to do. I mean, Ivano's talking about reaching down to where the US level is, 17 tons per capita, but to reach the Paris Agreement, we need to get down to 0 and below. So I think it's very important to, one, always reflect and say, yes, we have achieved a lot, we can take pride in that, but two, it's not to rest on that laurel, and I think that's a clear message from His Highness, to always move forward, always keep challenging and progressing, and I think we can achieve that. I think one of the very important things that we've seen from government here, particularly in the last 10 years, it's accountability on policies. It's setting a policy, measuring what it's achieved, and being very quantified and smart with those objectives. As I said, I work around the world, and smart cities, for example. In a number of places, India has launched 100 smart cities. The scales of these cities is enormous. Mauritius, they've got this smart city initiative that if your development is a smart city, you get tax breaks. You don't pay certain taxes. The concern I have is when you dive into these policies, regulations for how they define smart cities, they use language like, to the furthest extent possible, use renewable energy. Try and use smart technologies to reduce your energy as much as you can. If feasible, do this. It's language which is very loose, and the risk, and I've seen this happening with some of these projects, is that people say, yep, we'll just do a report, we'll talk about the things that we're doing by accident, which are nice, submit it, we're a smart city, we've achieved what we have. And I think what we've benefited from the government here is that if you take all of our strategies, the Dubai demand-side management strategy, 30% reduction by 2030, it's measured every year. Where are we on track with progress? The green building regulations that have come with it. What are we specifically doing? The retrofit programs, retrofit 30,000 buildings by 2030 and so on. So that's been a very positive aspect, which I think, and I'll take one of Ivano's points here, is that we are a small impact in the scheme of things. However, what I would disagree is that, yes, we have a small impact, but we have an opportunity for leadership. The region and the world now looks to the United Arab Emirates and Dubai as a leader. What are they doing? What should we emulate? And we have to realize that we have that responsibility, that if we act fast, decisively, aggressively with change, and if we succeed, the impact we have is not going to be the 150 million tons that we're generating here. It's going to be cascaded on the region, and that is our impact and also our responsibility, that we have to take that on and keep progressing forward. But I'm positive forums like this, a number of the strategies we're seeing are really advancing things very quickly. But I'd say that the two key points is to maintain that measurable approach to regulation and policy, and two, we need to now get more aggressive very quickly if we're to achieve some of the sort of environmental and energy goals that the world needs us to achieve.
Excellent. I mean, this is
I think I want to
sorry, go ahead.
I want to hit up on what Zaid said. I think when we look at the example from India, Prime Minister Modi launched a 100 smart city initiative, and 2 weeks later launched 100 accessible cities. So looking at the inclusion dimension. Now, and then there's a lot of efforts on environmental sustainability in India as well. However, when we went to talk to the government, the ministries, and the government agencies, they had nobody on their smart city planning team that was looking at inclusion. They had nobody on the 100 accessible cities team looking at smart city issues. So they really failed to find a way to create synergies with the existing national efforts. And I think that's where the opportunity that we have in the UAE, but really what we have as a global society, is to look at how to implement these goals in a way that we aren't creating additional reporting mechanisms, and additional types of data sets, and additional types of verticals, but actually look at the horizontal approach that allows synergies to happen, which is why Mira's work is so important on the SDG councils, which is why we're very excited to contribute to the SDG 11 Council, the perspective of inclusion. But then you look at globally networks of cities. There's over 300 networks that engage cities. And these networks are oftentimes looking at different urban development issues, but aren't creating an ecosystem that interconnects the different types of best practices and innovation so that we can actually scale up, create synergies, and create an ecosystem that drives forth inclusive, resilient, and responsive, smart urban development. So one of the things that we did when we saw this issue in India is my organization, World Enabled, partnered with another organization founded by the UN, and we said, let's tackle the issue and let's measure our impact in the smart city space. Smart cities have been positioning themselves in the first wave in terms of what is the backbone infrastructure that you need in a city without looking at the end users. And so what we said is we can create a 3-year project, 4-year project, where the first year we really understand what's happening within the cities and their smart city strategies, and where are the gaps in terms of addressing populations that aren't part of that story. So we did a global survey of smart city experts, and we found that only 18% of smart city experts could name one smart city, that was using accessibility standards in the way that they built their smart cities. And a majority said that smart cities around the world were failing persons with disabilities and older persons. So my talk earlier was called I Love Smart Cities, but they don't love me back yet, right? Because we're at the very critical moment where we could risk leaving out large portions of the population and risk failing our own commitments to the Sustainable Development Goal unless we find that synergy. So what Saeed is talking about, and Ivano, with the carbon footprints and the environmental sustainability is also critical. A global organization that we're recently partnering with called C40, which is looking at the carbon issues and the climate change issues, has launched a sub-campaign called Inclusive Resilient Cities, or Inclusive Smart Cities. And that's where we see those intervention points. So in terms of our smart city contribution that we are contributing to, or that we're engaging with, London, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Quito, Mexico, these are all cities that we've been working directly with to give them a toolkit so that they know how to build in more accessibility, more inclusive outcomes into their smart city strategies. The toolkit's available in 10 languages, including Arabic. We hope to partner with Smart Dubai to help provide this toolkit for the region and really continue to connect these conversations so that we truly don't leave people behind.
That's amazing. Now, we're almost out of time. We cannot extend this panel, but although I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I would like to ask each of you in 1 minute each to give us priority areas. What are the priority areas from a policy point of view that we need to focus on over the next 5 to 10 years in achieving the SDGs in their areas, in your area, as a city planner, as an infrastructure developer, as a policy-driven office, as a thought leadership area in terms of inclusive and social inclusion. So give us a 1 minute view on these priority areas that we, whether as a school of government that is focusing on research and education, or as policymakers working in the areas, need to be driven and focusing on over the next 5 to 10 years.
Smart Dubai, as a government body here in Dubai, we really focus on identifying synergies. So identifying synergies and ensuring that all from a government perspective, all government entities, we are all speaking the same language. We have a unique identified set of goals and targets that we work on to achieve together. We work on hand in hand, identifying synergies, no silos, and working together towards achieving the goals.
And that's a great lesson actually in the development of Smart Dubai that we've highlighted in many of our research, that kind of collaborative way of doing things. Ivano?
I sound like a broken record. There is opportunity in change, and I believe the private sector is the key enabler. In the last decade, carbon markets have demonstrated how we can harvest such potential. It wasn't the case for the past few years, but things are moving back to where it used to be. But still, private sector is the key towards implementing this change.
So and that does include public-private partnerships as well that needs to be developed in that
Or
area.
SDG 17.
Or SDG 17. Saeed, what are our priorities?
Well, on the topic of this panel around smart cities, and I speak a lot of smart city forums, and I always repeat this: smart cities and technology is the enabler, not the solution. Don't let the technology drive the solution. Let the principles and fundamentals drive the solution. And we have the best opportunity we've ever had with some of the technology interconnectivity to use it properly. I give the example of in India, and Dr. Victor mentioned the same thing, is I looked at some of these smart cities, they didn't have the basics of energy efficiency,
Sure.
the basics of walkability, the basics of connectivity, providing jobs close to work, which we talked about as fundamentals in the 80s and 90s, but they threw technology at it. We've moved backwards. So technology, smart cities is an extremely strong enabler and a great opportunity. Let's use it wisely.
I think, Saeed, you hit the nail on the head. What do we value? We invest in the things that we value, but there's also critical technical support that cities need. Our research has shown us from the Smart Cities for All initiative is that there's really 4 or 5 things that we heard from cities. We built out the tools to help cities on these things. One is they want a tool to understand how to communicate a greater commitment to accessibility in smart cities. So it's a PowerPoint with a business case, a technical case, and a policy case on why you should be looking at the issue of inclusion. Number 2 is they wanted to know a simple way of what are those accessibility standards. Smart Dubai has done a great job looking at the AA, AAA rating of government websites, auditing the websites. So those standards are important, and then understanding how to monitor that you're actually achieving those standards is critical. So we have a toolkit for that. Another thing that we heard is, cities spend a lot of money, and they need to spend this money responsibly. So if one thing that I would say is procurement policy. Procurement policy. Build this into the contracts so that when you build a system or buy a bus or build a building or have an initiative, it's built with these values and these technical standards in the contract. And if you don't put it in the contract, you have to then later spend more money trying to fix the issue. So we provide a model procurement policy for smart cities that they can adopt. And then a couple other quick wins. A database of solutions, so you understand what kind of smart city solutions can promote these issues. Another quick win is looking at innovation ecosystems like startups and accelerators so that the new innovations actually incorporate these issues from the beginning. So that's the toolkit we developed, really listening to what cities want, smart cities want, and how we can help them. So you can see that at smartcitiesforall.org.
Great. Thank you, Victor, for all these valuable advice, the valuable advice you've given us in the talk and in this panel, and to the distinguished panelists from the other entities as well. What I would like to thank you first all for this a very insightful panel and talking about specifically policies related to SDGs 9 and 11. But I would like to also invite you to join after the next panel, after lunch, and then after the next panel. There are workshops that are taking place across the conference, the forum, in the afternoon, that you're inviting to join, and these will go deeper into many of these areas. They will discuss research and publications some of them by panelists, some of them by invited authors from around the world, as well as policy students of public policy in the UAE and in the school itself. I would also like to invite you to consider considering these advice in your work, regardless where you're working on. If you're working on research, this is a roadmap for research. If you're working on policy, these are some elements, a lot of food for thought here to embed in your policy discussions and developments and roadmaps. And with this, I will conclude this panel, and I think the next stage we will have lunch and some official opening ceremony. So thank you again, everybody, for joining this panel, for your thoughts and ideas, and please join me in thanking all of the panelists for their insightful areas. Thank you.
Just checking the sound's on. Yes, thank you all very much. And thank you, Fadi, for some really insightful questions. As mentioned there, we will now be heading into a brief networking and lunch break. Please do rejoin us back in here from 12:30, where my colleague Mohammed Al-Qabi will be guiding us through the official opening ceremony that will be in Arabic, and then the next panel on mainstreaming policies will also be in Arabic. Reminder that you've got those translation services through the headsets for English and Arabic translations. After that, we'll be going back to the workshops, as Fadi mentions, which will be in English, and we look forward to inviting you to engage in those. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.